Yeah, yeah, for real.
Remember to cheers our
Indeed,
tea.
indeed. So let's cheer to our tea, because there is no community without the tea, right? Oh, wow. So welcome back, everyone. We are going to tackle this beast called identity once more. I was thinking about what you talked about in our previous episode around building a community around the celebration of tea. I'd love to hear more about this, because I feel like this is breaking new ground, actually. It looks like you're looking for alternatives in New Zealand, say, around the whole drinking culture. Are you trying to encourage more of a tea drinking culture rather than a booze drinking culture? I think that's refreshing, bud.
Refreshing. It's born from the passion that, as I mentioned before, as Chinese people, as ethnic Chinese, Southeast Asians, we do have something to offer. And I grew up with tea and tea appreciation, and of course, it's in my culture. I didn't necessarily experience Kung Fu brewing, which is brewing with skill. But I've always known tea is quite a medicinal thing, and also mainly from my grandfather's experience with diabetes and heart disease. He did live to the ripe old age of 92, so it could be a factor.
He was doing something right, indeed.
But also the social aspects of it. How tea is always a complementary part of a Chinese meal. It's the idea around getting people together and let's have tea time, and so much so that the English at the time, back in centuries ago, they saw the value of that, and obviously they saw the value of it. That's why they brought it back to England, and then tea culture exploded in England for that reason. So we know that there's value, but all these the knowledge, the traditions, the culture has kind of been lost because it's been inaccessible to Westerners, not limited to New Zealand, of course. So here's a chance for us to show the value that we have in our traditions, and in the context of the West. So in my experience doing tea ceremonies, tea tastings, tea appreciations, tea house socials, for example, some of this information does come through, and then some of our Kiwi friends who experience the joys of tea drinking start to get a sense that, hey, this is actually quite cool. In some cases, they get inspired by that.
Yeah, gotcha.
I love that. I love it when Westerners practice and express Tai Chi really, really well. They're learning from like the real, what I deem the true masters as well, and a lot of them are Chinese. And then they go on and teach the art, and I'm like, great, it's fantastic. This is a Chinese tradition that they are starting to appreciate, and I feel very glad that that's happening. So in a way, this is a form of leadership that I was talking about in the previous episode. But the key is to lead ourselves to a place of recovery and growth, so that we can develop this confidence in ourselves to recognize this value, and then be passionate about this value, and then people will just catch on with this, and then they'll people have a tendency to follow, and they want a good reason to follow something. And usually passion is a very good reason, rational reason to say, hey, count me in. I want to learn this.
Oh, absolutely. So, certainly a worthy cause such as this that you're exploring. Yes.
This is a practical approach as to what I mean by rethinking, our identity, in the sense that we are not just here to adapt another person's culture, but to take a more integrative approach to say, well, I'm going to learn something from you because you have got value, and I hope that you recognize my value in this process too. Now, this is what I mean by integration of society, integration of peoples. I think it's really important.
Boom. I like the theme that you've picked up on as well around flipping the script, because we've spoken in previous podcasts around how there's been a lot of conflict and division and tension, and quite often identity is actually weaponized against individuals and communities, whereas what you're talking about here is actually taking it back and actually turning identity into a form of empowerment. I love that. And
Exactly.
this speaks to what you mentioned about leadership. I think this is an important trajectory, I think, for us to be charting. So yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your thoughts on leadership and self-management and so forth.
Well, it is a big topic. It really is its own topic. I think you can go into great length about it. But in short, in summary, I would say that it starts from your own sense of belief, your sense of your self-belief, your self-confidence, your self-esteem. And mind you, I mean, it's very hard when you come from a place where you're being beaten down in society, and you might have felt that way for a long time. But then part of leadership is to take responsibility for self and go, you know what? Enough of this victim stuff. I've been in victim mode for a long time, and I think I expressed my anger in many activistic ways. But I also not influence anything. You know, you saying, you're shouting at people. Why aren't you integrating? You know, why isn't there integration? And you're pissed off about it. You're emotional about it. No one wants to follow that stuff. You know, just a mad ranting person. You know, like where's the mana in that?
Absolutely.
So there's no mana in being a victim of society.
Absolutely.
I go with
rising above.
Yeah. Well, life. My personal philosophy is life isn't equal. You know, I might get beaten down, but we can strive for equality. You know, certain things I don't have, certain privileges I don't have, certain privileges I have that Westerners don't have. But so, if I think that I expect the West to go, hey, let me come and empower you, does that actually empower me? I think it would be better if the empowerment came from myself or my community. And I think we have a lot of this narrative from white privilege and Black Lives Matter right now. You know, the white knight and all that stuff. No, I don't want a white knight to come to save me. You know,
or any kind of knight for that matter.
Yeah.
Be your own knight, really. Be your own knight.
So I think we have to at some point move out of that victimized mentality into a place where you're going to take responsibility and initiative over your own condition of life. And that will take a certain process. I'll say, you know, it depends on how ready you are for that as well. And I certainly don't want to force it on people, but there'll be a certain point where you be like, enough is enough. I think I got to change. I got to flip the script, and maybe now it's time to empower myself and build myself up. And it takes a lot of work. You know, I had to go through a lot of facing a lot of fears to see my value come through, for example. And here's a good example. I've grown up with a deep fear of cameras. I don't like recordings.
Interesting.
I think you mentioned it before yourself. Like, hey,
Yeah, I do feel like we kind of resonate around this whole stage fright element, which is interesting because, we're both musicians and we've both performed on stage before. And when you perform on stage, people are going to snap photos of you and take videos on you and upload them and, splice them and all this kind of stuff. And so you're out there. So at some point, I think you just kind of have to just overlook this perhaps, or just be okay with it and somehow just not let it get to you, I think. And I guess this is all part of that journey of rising above perhaps your fears and other things that hold you back. You spoke about the victimhood, and I think it's important to obviously acknowledge the traumas and the pain and suffering that we've been through, because we've all faced those, right? No, I don't think anyone is immune to this, even if you're incredibly privileged. So it's okay to acknowledge what we've been through, but not let ourselves be defined and bogged down by the past. I think this speaks to really self-leadership and self-management, because I think it was the Buddha himself who said that actually one of the hardest tasks is really to manage yourself. Right? Don't bother yourself with others and managing other people's emotions and whatnot. Just focus on yourself. That is hard enough. And once you gain mastery over yourself, only then can you reach a point of, I guess, greater awareness. Right? And I guess we have been taught the lesson of just how hard that is when we're doing Vipassana sits, for instance. We can't even manage our thoughts, as Goenka would refer to it, the monkey mind. It's just kind of jumping from one thought to another, like a monkey jumping from another, and just being restless, right? Our restless minds, right? Even managing that in itself is tough enough, right? And so maybe that's where we start, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's probably the hardest thing. In the first 3 days, you're seriously sitting there just going, oh, what is going on with my mind? And then we reflect it outside, to our external world. And of course, then we lose our mind. Maybe all of us have lost our minds.
Perhaps we have. But maybe we need to lose them to find our minds and find ourselves again, yeah? That's the whole point.
Well, that's the trouble with, when we talk about identity and people identifying as being a victim, and sometimes it's hard because you do define yourself based on that, and then it's very hard to move out from that because your community sort of like requires you to maintain the identity, and then if you do change it, then suddenly you become a hypocrite, and so there's a lot of judgment and shaming associated with change as well, especially when you're, I guess, you're honing and defining your identity. So it's hard to find identity around an external group, for example, although we have an inclination to do so. I'm a metalhead, I like metalhead. With band t-shirts again, yeah, there we go. But what if you suddenly your music taste change and but I'm into jazz now, or I'm into Justin Bieber.
Hopefully not that last one. I have to focus a little bit more. I mean, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I won't hold it against you. It's all right.
No. I'm not, like putting down Justin Bieber. I'm just saying it's definitely a different style of music from metal. And metal is defined themselves away from those type of music,
Sure.
Not to say it's bad, it's
yeah. To pass on his music abilities. Yeah. Well, what you spoke about there, Bud, is the fact that identity is fluid, and perhaps the trick isn't to attach oneself too much to these identification type characteristics, right? Because if you tell yourself, okay, I am this, 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 and that, and you hold on to these aspects, really firmly, and that's who you want to always be, then you're always going to get stuck in a bit of a rut, because you're always going to find yourself maybe, orienting around these types of individuals, and maybe you don't gel with them anymore as you evolve as a person. So I think it's important to keep it fluid, perhaps. And, just go with the flow.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why I think it's better to find identity from within ourselves. And I know it's very hard to do that without external sort of like validation, so to speak. That's why the internal work is so important, and then not to take yourself so seriously, to identify so hard with that as well. But it also speaks a lot about our general social tendency to need to belong. And the belonging part that we often talk about is also associated with an identity, I believe. Sometimes the social group makes us who we are. And if we go back to the whole idea of, what is a Kiwi? Do I actually identify with that social group, or do I identify with something else, a subculture, for example, my knitting group, or or something,
It could be many things, right? So it doesn't have to be just limited to just one thing. It's just,
and also, what defines that big group, especially in the big scale? Like, I identify as a man, but do I identify with all aspects of being a man, or what society currently defines as a man? Sure, I mean, I do this work to figure it out, but what does it mean for an Asian man? And so I go back to the point, plurality, intersectionality. We have so many defining things. So I can be very, very loose with my identity, and that's why this is an explanation as to why we did have a misunderstanding, I think, around my my call to define myself as a Kiwi. I think us loose about it. I do have a New Zealand passport, so I'm quite bound to this land, and so given that I was admitted in, and being admitted in, I'm like, okay, well, you want me to be Kiwi, all right then, I'll be Kiwi. But what does it actually mean? I don't know. I'm not a rugby fan. I don't even know how cricket works. I don't care about sports. I think pie's all right.
There are aspects of Kiwiana that you vibe with, and others that you don't. And I think this is probably the experience for, I guess, any New Zealander too, right? There's some aspects you gel with, some you don't, and it's kind of a mixture of this. It doesn't have to be the same across the board. And perhaps this is where, I guess, conversations need to be had across the nation, because we did speak about this, I think, in a previous conversation, that actually New Zealand is a very young country in the scheme of things. It's even younger in a sense than our birth country, Singapore, which was founded in 1819, right? Because more than 2 decades later, that's when the Brits landed in Aotearoa. So in a way, we have experienced Britishness already before we even arrived in New Zealand, and then again there, and now I'm experiencing this again in the UK. And we've all been socialized into kind of actually an interesting space, because we do straddle this east and west. and it plays into our identities. And I guess perhaps this is why, for example, I spoke about this in the previous podcast, that I felt kind of a distance, a disjunct with the Chinese in mainland China, because they don't have that East-West divide, if you like. You know, we've had that growing up in Singapore, and again, exploring that in New Zealand, right? So that's really interesting. And I think this actually speaks to the experience of the Chinese diaspora, perhaps. You know, those of us who have migrated and live in the West, because we're a bit of, you know, the East, we're a bit of the West, and we're kind of a bit of both, hence the whole banana reference, right? Because we're trying to find a way to integrate, to balance these aspects of our identity, and sometimes they clash, sometimes they do work together, and so it's actually a journey of finding out what works and what doesn't. And perhaps this is the lifelong exploration we have to, you know, delve into individually and collectively.
We do have a very different colonial experience, being ex-Singaporeans, and versus over here, which is a different colonial experience. Now, as you're just talking about our British influence in our education, you know, I went to the Anglo-Chinese school, which is founded by the British. Who's the founder? Oldham. Yeah, I remember that. Bishop Oldham was the founder of Anglo-Chinese School. You went to the Raffles Institution.
That's right. That's right. The notorious and famed RI.
Oh, yeah, Raffles.
The oldest school in Singapore.
Yeah, and Raffles was the dude who supposedly founded Singapore. We were very brought up in a very anglicized country. Even my granddad, the one I spoke about, who lived in 1992, when he speaks English, he speaks with a Victorian type. You know, there's a Victorian type
posh
twang to it. You know.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah. So we are no stranger to colonization. I think the difference is that in our experiences, we were the dominant race in Singapore as Chinese. So there was a lot of privilege associated with that.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
And then we get plonked into. Well, no, we didn't get plonked. We moved here for various reasons. As an immigrant, a lowly immigrant to New Zealand, and then suddenly we are like, oh, we lost all that societal privilege. It's how interesting, eh?
That is interesting.
Yeah. So our identity got really shaken from a really privileged position to a not so privileged position. Albeit a better life. Yeah.
That's actually a great point. You know, I never really experienced racism or thought about, you know, interracial conflict or anything of that nature until I guess I moved to New Zealand. So maybe perhaps part of my gripe with New Zealand is the fact that I felt like I was introduced to racism there, but I mean, it could have happened anywhere else, right? Anywhere else in the West. What you said about privilege is absolutely right, because in Singapore, so what's really interesting about the Singaporean experience is that we do pride ourselves, right, in being a multilingual, multicultural society that has somehow, I won't say perfected, certainly not perfected, but, you know, we're kind of seen as a model for integration, because, you know, we have 4 official languages amongst other things, and by and large, you know, we do have a pretty harmonious society. But if you look beneath the veneer, there are cracks there, and obviously there's casual racism, and there's racial innuendo, and so on and so forth, which is actually really interesting, because I looked into this with, you know, how COVID is affecting actually migrants all around the world, and I looked into also the experience of, say, the Bangladeshi migrants who live in Singapore. So this is interesting, right? Because we're talking about, you know, an ethnic group within an ethnic group type thing. So there aren't any East-West dynamics here. These are East versus East dynamics, if you like. Right? And so these are fellow Asians. We're talking about South Asians here versus Southeast Asians. We're still part of the umbrella of Asians. And yes, there is also, there's discrimination there and so on and so forth. But we are privileged because we are not exposed to this, because we're part of the racial majority in Singapore, being Singaporean Chinese. And New Zealand, suddenly that reality is shaken up. And now we realize, oh shit, we are now part of this minority and everything's unfamiliar. And bro, I don't know if you remember one of your earliest experiences of culture shock. But for me, it was around the fact that kids call adults by their first names. Like, in Singapore, we refer to an adult male as uncle so-and-so, or as a female auntie so-and-so, right? And they're certainly not necessarily related to us, but it's just a mark of respect that you're speaking to an elder. Right? And I've always adhered to that, absolutely. And I always got a slap on the hand when I forget to say uncle or auntie, type thing, right? And, moving to New Zealand and seeing that there was none of that, it was mind-blowing for me. I thought, how are all these rude kids not getting slapped and they're just getting away with it? And I was like, in Singapore, I would have, gotten a tight slap,
Yeah.
Mom and dad probably would hunt on me, So my mind. And I wonder what your first maybe recollection of culture shock in New Zealand might have been for you.
Yeah, that was a big one. What you call them, even the teachers, by the first name? I think no. I did go to a more conservative school, and just call them Mr. So and so, but we don't call them sir or madam, ma'am. Right. Whereas in Singapore, it's very, very common. You call your teacher Mr. So and so, or by sir, or but over here, at least in the public schools, is very much called by the first name kind of thing. And I found that was quite weird.
Very weird.
Yeah. And then bringing my friends home from when we go home after school, and then and trying to navigate. You call my parents auntie and uncle, and then they'll be like, huh? Oh, what's going on? There's definitely culture shock around there.
Yes, I remember that too. Yes, I remember I had a Pākehā friend who came over once, and I remember before I invited him back, he actually asked me, "Oh, so what are your parents' names?" And I said, "Oh, Dad's name is Dennis," and I said, "Mom doesn't have a Christian name, so her name's Lei Cheng." And he said, "Okay." He said, "Tell you what, I'll learn your dad's name first, because Dennis is easy enough to remember. Lei Cheng is kind of like foreign, right?" So anyway, I remember he came back and. Yeah, he just wanted to be friendly, and met my dad, and he's like, "Hi, Dennis," and I could see the look on my dad's face. He just had this "what the fuck" look on his face. Hi. And he kind of walked off, and it was just really awkward because and so that was a moment of just like, man, there are two worlds just clashing right now. There's this Kiwi world, right, which I'm now a part of, and then there's this Singaporean world that I've just come from. And it's still so comforting and familiar to me, and I'm trying to navigate, I guess these have a leg in each canoe type thing, and trying to do a balancing act in this case. But this was quite a challenge to begin with.
And, well, that highlights
a good experience, right? Yeah.
Well, that really highlights the issue of the culture shock and an identity that you shift from one to the next, and then you're just going, well, you gotta discard the old one or bring in a new one, or you're a bit of both, and it's a hard one to figure out because it's hard to switch hats sometimes. Between you and I, we can probably switch hats into a more Singlish way of talking.
For sure.
Yeah, but let's not do that, right?
For now, maybe.
It'll do my head in. But it's hard to talk in that same way with another person of a different reference point, because
Absolutely.
we're used to a different mode of thinking.
Mm.
But it's pretty cool as if you want to see it as value, like
Oh, yes.
traversing different cultures. You understand the Asian culture, and then you also understand the Kiwi culture, and you also understand the Western culture. So you're
It's a bit of this, bit of that, eh?
a bit of this
Definitely.
rojak,
Road
rojak.
truck. I was just thinking of road truck, but food truck. Yes, with road truck. Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
But
Or like
it's
gumbo stew or something like that, but for a Western reference. But yeah, it's the idea that you bring to the right all these different components and make it work somehow. And this whole that you created is actually more than the sum of its parts. And I think it's a
yeah,
beautiful thing. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, for the viewers who don't understand, who have never been exposed to rojak, it's a Southeast Asian dish from the Chinese and the Malay side. Very popular in Indonesia and in Singapore, Malaysia too. That you get all sorts of different things. You chuck it all together and you put sauce all over it, and boom, you got a mishmash of everything.
That's
And
correct.
that's rojak. Yeah,
It is
uh,
rojak, and it works. It's a kind of salad, really, where
it's
you
like a
just
salad. Yeah.
put in bits and pieces together, and somehow it works. And there's so many variations. Yeah, absolutely. We are really a mixture of so many different aspects, really. And I think that is it's a beautiful thing. You're right. You're right.
Yeah.
It's something we should celebrate more. I feel this is
Mm.
it's something I feel really as blessed about in terms of coming from that part of the world, because having to operate at the intersection point of so many different worlds, I think is really a superpower in the scheme of things, because
Mm.
it allows you to be more versatile, perhaps, and more adaptable. Right? So in a sense, we're kind of chameleons, because
Mm.
we are so adaptable and we're able to literally change color just to fit in somewhere. And I guess this is why, when it comes to adaptability, we do pass with flying colors. You know, so we are chameleons. We are chameleons, but we're comedians too, because we appreciate the funny side of life, right? When you have to wear so many different hats, at some point you just have to laugh at yourself and be like, you know what? We ought not to take life so seriously anymore.
Mm.
Yeah, and just find a way to be part of so many different worlds. So we are chameleons and also comedians, right? Because we are kind of shapeshifters with a sense of humor, I guess. Not shapeshifters in an alien sense. Yeah, this is definitely not an alien
Sometimes
disclosure.
I wonder.
Sometimes I do wonder. Sometimes I do wonder. Oh no, our human skin disguise is wearing off. Let's quickly end this. No, but certainly we wear different hats,
Yeah.
and
Well,
it's
you're right. You're
superpower.
right. A superpower in our identity that we can change, and I think that's the key. Our identity is really fluid,
Absolutely.
and that is actually a strength, and we can adapt, and that's fantastic. We become more worldly. We become more understanding of the cross cultural platform and all. You're absolutely right. There's so much value to see in this whole dynamic, even in identity, as
Absolutely.
long as we don't be static about it.
Absolutely. And then realize that life is just constant flux, really. And
Mm.
if we attach ourselves just to one way of being, we're missing on so much more. Okay,
Mm.
and certainly this is a skill even that we have, that we ought to fine tune, really, as part of this kind of self management. That actually it's okay not to be an obvious or immediate fit somewhere, because it gives us this advantage, really, where we're able to just pop in and out of different social spheres and not feel like we are bound by a certain scene, right? So just as we are metalheads, yes, certainly we also identify as other things as well, and the fact that we are able to be so many different things simultaneously in this body, and somehow make sense of all this in this mind that we have, and still maintain an equilibrium sense of identity, shows that there is a certain core aspect that we ground ourselves in. And perhaps this is the journey that we're on, really, to find this balance and also this purpose. So this feels like a conversation that needs to really continue, because this is going to keep evolving really to more and more subtopics, I feel. And I wonder if you had any last words perhaps around identity that you wanted to impart for now.
Oh, starts within.
Starts within.
Yeah. And find the people around you that can help bring it out of you. And it's a process of discovery. Finding yourself. It's a cliche, but it's absolutely true. And it doesn't come to us. Most definitely not for me. I rush things as well, so it didn't come to me overnight. It's a bit of a process. Sometimes the change of environment is really essential, like travel. But if you are of the mindset that you're trying to discover, and you're open-minded enough to discover the process, the rewards do actually come. And then once the confidence comes, then you realize that you can really live your full potential, and it's priceless, absolutely priceless. I recommend that path for people out there. Yeah. Yeah.
And I guess this is why we really resonate around seeker types. We're looking for something, and we're looking for a better way of life, a better way to be, a better future for ourselves and our loved ones. And so I think that this is what's really exciting about this platform we're building. We're seeking together. Right? And so a reflection I've had recently is around how identity is certainly empowerment around community involvement, and we certainly touched on this. And this is actually a Zulu concept, I believe, around Ubuntu, which is I am because we are. Oh, it's mind-blowingly powerful. It's a concept that's very foreign, I guess, in perhaps Western culture and Western philosophy even. But it's perhaps something that we're more familiar with, because we do come from more collectivistic cultures, if you like. So this idea that we kind of have to straddle both, really. It's not about completely subsuming yourself under this umbrella. So there are authoritarian versions of totalitarianism where the individuality completely gets eliminated. But then there's the more radical form of individualism that you see maybe in say America, for example, in the state of Texas and so forth. The redneck types are all about the individual liberty above all else. And that's another extreme, right? So we're trying to find this balance between the two extremes and trying to find this middle path. And I feel like this is actually this is such a fascinating project, because we're all about empowering ourselves as individuals, and we're also all about empowering collectives and communities as well. And there's a way actually to do both, and by straddling both, actually, we are enhancing and strengthening the overall visions and causes that we want to engage in. So this is such an exciting journey. And perhaps next time we may even have the opportunity to have other like-minded individuals join us, perhaps. So it's something we want to explore. But
yeah, absolutely. Okay, on the final note, we will wrap it up here. And I would like to invite the viewers, if they enjoyed this video and the content, please like, subscribe, and comment. That really help us, and your comments will actually help us create more content as well, and of course we like to expand this whole community and discussion around this, because we're all learning, and I'm learning most of all as well. So thank you everyone.
Absolutely.